Matt here with PuppyGraph, and today we're going to be demonstrating how PuppyGraph can work with pharmaceutical and medical data using a dataset from Drug Central. This dataset enhances our understanding of clinical information by connecting medications to important sources like FAIRs for adverse reactions and patents, manufacturers and release dates. This dataset also aids medical research by linking to databases such as Uniprot, OMIM, SNOMED, and OMOP. It includes vital data such as structural formulas and solubility. In this demo, we'll show how easy it is to use PuppyGraph to effectively manage complex queries that are challenging for traditional databases to handle. First, let's take a look at how PuppyGraph can be deployed.
When it comes to deploying PuppyGraph, this can be done in two main ways. Firstly, you can launch PuppyGraph in Docker. If you go to our docs under Getting Started, you'll be able to see the Launching PuppyGraph in Docker docs. This goes through step by step how to start and access the PuppyGraph container. So as you can see, we have a Docker run command here, and then you're able to access PuppyGraph on localhost 8081 if you follow this exact command. Of course, you can tweak it as you need to. This just gives you a starting point. The beauty is that this can be run on any cloud provider, including GCP, Azure, and AWS. Alternatively, you can also launch PuppyGraph on the AWS Marketplace through our PuppyGraph AMI. We also have docs to explain how to do this as well, which goes through how to subscribe to PuppyGraph and how to launch the PuppyGraph instance through AMI. Once you've got PuppyGraph up and running, our entire platform is covered in the docs, and it's a great way to become acquainted with how to upload schemas and how to design them, how to query in PuppyGraph, graph visualization, and any other features that might be useful for you. In this particular demo, we are going to use PuppyGraph in Docker on my local machine. Now, with PuppyGraph running on Docker, the first step that we'll do is go to localhost port 8081, which if you're following the command in our documentation, this is where it will be running. And I'm going to log into it using the default credentials. With those default credentials populated, which would be username of PuppyGraph, password of PuppyGraph123, all lowercase, I can then proceed and click sign in. Once we're logged into PuppyGraph, the first screen that we're going to come to is the schema screen. Now for this particular demo, we're going to have two data sources up and running, one in Iceberg and one in Postgres. There's three ways that we can upload the schema. We can either create the graph schema using PuppyGraph's graph schema UI tool. We can upload the graph schema through a JSON document, or coming soon, PuppyGraph's graph schema helper that will create the schema based on the relational schemas of the underlying data sources. This gives users three ways to create schemas within PuppyGraph, allowing them to choose which approach best suits their skill level. Regardless of how this is done, we can use any of the connected data sources without creating any ETL pipelines and make that data available as a graph. In this case, I'm going to use the upload graph schema JSON and upload a JSON file. Let's take a brief look at what that will look like. You'll see in this schema that I've got catalogs, vertices, and if I search for edges, you'll see edges down here as well. Now, for each of these, what you'll see is for our catalogs, we have the name of our catalog, the type, so we have our Postgres instance and our Iceberg instance, and then some details around how to connect to them. So we're using JDBC to connect to the Postgres server, and then we're using some Metastore details here to connect to a Iceberg instance hosted on Tabular. For our vertices, you'll be able to see what the label is, and then you can see how we're mapping that from the data source into this specific node. The same thing goes for our edges here, where we have an edge label and then a mapped table source, which allows us to explain where this data is coming from. And I'm going to take this one and upload it to our PuppyGraph instance. I'll select Drug Central Hybrid, which gives me the schema with two data sources, and then click Upload. And you can see now that I'm uploading this graph schema, and now we can see what this schema looks like in a visual format. So here on the side, we can see each of the nodes. We can also see each of the edges. So total nodes, 34, edges, 42. 19 of these nodes are powered by Postgres, and 15 are powered by Iceberg. In terms of edges, we have 28 that are powered by Postgres, and 14 that are powered by Iceberg. And you can actually see which ones are which or being pulled from what data source by clicking and taking a look. So here we can see that drugcentral.public. This is going to be coming from Postgres. And here we can see data sources drugcentral_iceberg. So this is going to be coming from Iceberg. And we can also look at that here too. We can see that we are correctly connecting to both our Drug Central PostgreSQL data store, as well as our Drug Central Iceberg instance here, and the vertices and edges that we imported through our schema upload. Now, if we want to reset the schema and put a new one in, we can also adjust that here by clicking Reset Schema. And next what we'll do is we'll head over to Dashboard. Once we're on the dashboard screen, you'll see that we've got a couple of things here by default. First, we'll have a vertex count, an edge count, some vertex labels here, as well as the count. We'll have a graph samples widget here, as well as a vertex samples down here. Now these are here by default and just run some very, very simple queries. What we want to do is add in some new tiles so that we can look at some stuff that's relevant to the drug information that we have within our data sources. Each of these tiles we can resize as we need to, and we can also edit them. So here you can see that title vertex g.v count, and then you can see that I'm just displaying it as type text. Now you can also display this as a graph. You can also display it as a table. This here that we've got in the background, that's going to be displayed as a graph. The one as a table you can see here as vertex samples or vertex labels. Now I'm going to add some new stuff here, so we'll click plus. I'm going to take this all the way to the top here so it's easy for us to see, and then I'm going to spread this out, and then I'll click the edit here. Now this specific dashboard is going to be running a query where it's going to list all the drugs that are approved by the FDA. So if I do title, I'll say FDA-approved drugs and add a D to the title there. And then I am going to add in my query, which is going to look for nodes where there is an approval of type of FDA. And I'm going to limit to the first 50 here. Display type, we'll display this as a table, and then I'll click submit. And as you can see here, we've already got back our results. So you can see our names on the side here, and these are all FDA approved drugs, as well as different fields that are available within this data set. Let's add one more that's a little bit more advanced. I'll click the plus button, and you'll see that it adds a new tile in for me. Now I'm going to drag this one up to the top here and go like this. Click the pencil mark here. And this one, we're going to do a bit more advanced query where we're going to get drugs with mechanisms of action for human targets. And we're going to make sure that we only return 50 results here. So this query leverages both data sources. This is going to pull from Postgres and from Iceberg and stitch together the data so that we can see it in graph form. And we'll call this MOA for human targets. Display type will be table, and I will click submit. And now you can see all drugs where the mechanism of action is for human targets. And if we look a little bit closer at this query, you'll be able to infer exactly what we've got going on here. Essentially, we're going to get out all of the drugs that have a mechanism of action for human targets. And that's how we can customize our dashboard so that we can make certain queries easily accessible. And for those who are less familiar with graph queries, they'd still be able to come in here and browse through this data based on how we've plugged it into the dashboard. Now, conceptually, all of this drug information is in the main Postgres database, and all the bioactivity and targets data is in the Iceberg instance. And that's going to serve this supplementary information within the complete data set. Now, there may be cases where we also want to just run a query. And in that case, we can come over to query here, and you can see that we support a Gremlin query. You're also able to go into the Gremlin console. You're also able to go into a Cypher console and run Cypher queries here. And then you can click here, which will toss you into a graph notebook. And I can click that here, and you'll see that it will open up a graph notebook for me here. Now, I want to focus mainly on Gremlin query here. And let's run that same query that we had before, where we're looking for FDA-approved drugs. So I'm going to come in here, paste my query again, click play, And now you can see on the side here that I get a visualization of all of this data. Now you can explore this data by clicking on different nodes and edges. As you can see, we've got a ton of data here. And if you want to expand a particular node and see associated properties, you can do that without any code. So that's a key feature here of PuppyGraph, is providing no-code data exploration. So once you click on a particular node, PuppyGraph displays the corresponding graph queries in both Gremlin and Cypher just by clicking on the graph. So we can see, as we click through here, you can see on the side that we'll actually get the corresponding query to pull back this data here. You can also look at these in different ways. So right now I'm looking at it in radial layout, but I could also look at it in a vertical layout. So we're able to see it through this way as well, depending on how you want to explore it. And then we can also look at it from a force layout too. I'll go back to radial layout and we can see all of our nodes and edges once again. And I'm going to run another query here, which is the same query that we ran in the previous dashboard, which is going to get back all of our mechanism of actions that are applicable to humans or Homo sapiens. So let's click play. So after running this second query, now we can use no-code exploration to expand the boundary of the graph on display. So over here, come over here, you can see that we have a node of type target. And besides the connections displayed on the graph viewer, there could also be more nodes and connections in the actual graph. To figure those out, we can right-click on this node and then select Expand with all edge labels. Now from here, we can see that we now have 4 new nodes that are connected to this specific target. One of them is a brand new node type called target component. Now, what we can do is do the same thing again, right-click, then do expand with all edge labels, and then it's going to give more neighbors for this particular target component. So now we get a couple of new types of nodes that pop up here, which include target keyword and gene ontology as well. And with this, you can see that we can directly view the corresponding nodes on the graph viewer without writing any query. So the queries are over here on the side. As we do things, it will actually run these queries, but you don't have to write those queries. You're able to just interact with the UI here. Now, if we switch back to the schema view, you can see that we can trace back our path here. So we went from target, then has target component, and this is our target component here. Then from here, we then can also see that these target components can be connected to a gene ontology as well as to a target keyword. And that whole path is actually supplemented by our Iceberg data source. Now, if we come back to our query and our Gremlin query here, PuppyGraph also allows us to search by a particular attribute. So if I come back to my query here and run this again, we'll see the visualization pop up. I will back out a bit. And what I'll do is, just outside of the graph here, I'll right click and I'll do prefetch props and enable search. And you can see that it's prefetching properties and we're loading in the bottom here. And then I can look for specific nodes within the graph or edges based on a specific property that they have. So what I'll do is I'm going to search for accession. We want to retrieve all the nodes where their value is P15692. And I'll click enter. And we can see over here that it's identifying which of these nodes that have that accession value. If I pick a particular one, you can see that this accession value matches what I'm searching for. So I'm actually able to query this data or look for where it is in the graph, and then I can explore it further. So if I wanted to go like this, I would be able to see what targets it's applicable to, and again, being able to explore what is connected via various edges here. We can see that this target is connected to each of these bioactivity markers. So any query that you want to run, whether that be through PuppyGraph's Gremlin query, Gremlin console, or Cypher console, this is going to allow you to leverage graph queries in a multitude of different ways, as well as being able to also put things into a graph notebook. You can also use the visualize screen here. If I click start, this will load up our graph data as well, and we can explore it in the same sense. However, the query console is going to allow you to do things just a little bit more targeted. However, this does give you full graph visualization capabilities here, so we can see and explore each of these data points as well. And this caps off a brief demo of how we can use PuppyGraph to explore drug information that is in two relational data stores, one being Postgres, one being Iceberg, and then use that data as a graph. For more information or to sign up for PuppyGraph, you can visit us at www.puppygraph.com.